Hello and welcome to A Deeper Look. There's been, billions of videos, possibly not quite that many, but there's more than we need. It's discussing how brilliant Christopher Nolan is and basically just sucking up his ass. And to be honest, I feel exactly the same way. If I had a choice between being here and being all the way up Christopher Nolan's ass, I'd be right up there. Today we'll be discussing Christopher Nolan and manipulating human perception. Let's just see where it goes. Let's have a bit of a listen to Christopher Nolan first, just to set the tone of what he does and to use it as a base to branch off into crazy topics like we tend to do on A Deeper Look. Of course, Christopher Nolan's first big movie was Memento, and here's a bit of Christopher Nolan discussing the difference between subjectivity and objectivity and how that was used in this film.
So they both alternate between the objective and the subjective. So in the screenplay, what I did is I said, I need a way of breaking up the flashbacks so that we separate the scenes in our mind and feel this progression further and further back in time. So what I did is I alternated between these color sequences that are intensely subjective. Everything in the color sequences is from Leonard's point of view. We're always in his head, at least to begin with. We alternate with these black and white sequences that, at least to begin with, are objective. They're presented a little bit more in a filmy way. It's black and white, it's grainy. The shots are sometimes overhead, a little bit more distance. It's a more objective view. We don't hear the voice at the other end of the telephone. We're not really in his head. The voiceovers in the color sequence from the black and white sequence are very different. In the color sequence, it's the voice of the mind. It's the first person. It's very much his thoughts as he's thinking them. In the black and white scenes, they sound a bit like interview grabs. You know, a bit like this kind of interview, edited and laid over pictures of him in this room going about his life. So I wanted to introduce this almost documentary style element at the beginning of the film.
Yeah, he's thought a bit about this stuff. And I guess that's why his approach to filmmaking is so unique. He tends to take a very analytical approach. And later in this interview, interestingly enough, the interviewer asks him to draw a diagram. And Christopher Nolan kind of struggles with this.
And all right, let's have a go.
Okay.
It's confusing because I don't think pictorially, diagrammatically. So, okay, what do you have? You have the beginning of the film here. What's the best way to draw it?
And to me, that's really weird for a filmmaker to say that they're a non-visual thinker, because I don't know about you guys. I see diagrams in my head all the time, usually diagrams of naked ladies or genitalia. Nolan is a master of manipulation. Now, that might sound like a bit of a harsh way to put it. I could just say he's a fantastic auteur, filmmaker, and leave it at that. But he's very into how is this affecting the viewer. So he's not just saying, this makes sense if he walks from here to there and then opens a door and then, comes out the other side. Christopher Nolan doesn't seem that concerned with that. He's more concerned about how is this going to affect the viewer when they see this. And if it happens that the best effect that he can get on the viewer is to do something that doesn't make any logical sense visually, he will do that. If you have a look at this clip here, you'll find he's very aware of what he's doing.
I'm extremely confident of that, but that is my job, that is my profession. Obviously, I'm aware that we're dealing with relative subtleties, but people often misunderstand just how sophisticated the human eye is and how it develops over time.
It seems to me that shows how aware he is of what he's doing to the viewer. And he seems to operate on a kind of faith that the human brain and the human eye will pick up the subtle clues that he builds into his movies. So in a sense, he's giving the audience the respect and assuming that they're intelligent enough to understand what he's doing. And I think that's a fantastic thing. And part of the reason why Christopher Nolan is considered an intelligent person's filmmaker. Not because you have to be intelligent to understand his films. I don't think you really do. But they make you feel intelligent when you watch them. I remember watching an interview with Christopher Nolan once a long time ago. It was around the time of Insomnia came out. He said in the interview, and I've never forgotten it, this must be more than 10 years ago now, that the runtime of Insomnia was too long. So what he did as an experiment was to just take every single shot and remove like half a second at the end of the shot, regardless of whether or not that made sense to do it. So he edited, as you normally edit, the natural feel of where the cuts should be and what they should do. And then he just removed half a second from every shot, which of course reduced the runtime of the movie by, say, 20 minutes or so. You know, you'd need math to work out exactly how long. Please don't do the math. I'll just say 20 minutes. In that interview, I wish I could find it again, and unfortunately I wasn't able to. But in that interview, he said by doing that, he found that these slight jump cuts in time, not only did they pick up the pace of the movie, but they kind of put the movie ahead of the audience in a sense, or at least kept the audience running to catch up. And in a way, that's one of the things that makes Christopher Nolan's movies feel like they're smarter than the audience. He even did this in The Dark Knight and the other Batman films. He definitely did it in Insomnia, Prestige, and Memento. Any time in a movie when he feels like he wants to create an air of mystery and disorientation in the audience, he tends to cut these shots just a little bit too short. It's stuff like that, the fact that he thinks these things through and tries to consider the effect of them, that makes him such an awesome filmmaker. And there aren't many filmmakers that do that. You know, potentially someone like Darren Aronofsky. There's a few subversive filmmakers out there, maybe Lars von Trier or, I don't know, who's that French guy that did Irreversible? But they're doing it in kind of a classless way. Christopher Nolan, the way he does it is extremely classy. It brings you along for the ride, and you feel challenged and rewarded for being able to keep up with his films. Have you ever got that feeling that sometimes you get in a movie, particularly a bad movie, where you just get broken out of the spell of the story by something that just feels a little bit too manipulative? And you go, oh, that movie's trying to manipulate me into crying. It's pathetic. Ha ha ha. You know, I'm tougher than that. And you get this sort of cynical response to it. You know, it's like watching a puppet show and then suddenly you notice the strings. It kind of ruins the illusion. I don't think it's the fault of the audience being cynical, although of course audiences are getting more sophisticated, I guess, as the years go on. So generally speaking, we're harder to trick, we're harder to manipulate these days. It's something that makes you think about perception, about the human brain, and about how these kinds of things tie together to create an illusion that in your mind, or at least your subconscious, feels very real. It makes me wonder, well, how can it affect everybody in the same way? We all have different experiences, different thoughts, different fears, different emotions. How can you create one film experience that is almost guaranteed to affect every audience member in a similar way? And it makes you wonder about the senses. You know, we always talk about the 5 senses, but I found a video by Vsauce talking about the 5 senses and whether or not we actually are limited to 5 senses. Let's have a quick look at that.
In fact, we have way more than the usual 5 senses we talk about. For instance, your kinesthetic sense, proprioception. This is what the police evaluate during a field sobriety test. It allows you to tell where your fingers and arms and head and legs and your body is all in relation to each other without having to look or touch other things.
Interesting thoughts that perhaps the 5 senses are not the only ways that we perceive the world. It made me wonder, is emotion a sense? I guess in a way they are separate, in a sense that they're kind of generated from the other senses that you have. So when you see and hear something that involves your girlfriend breaking up with you and telling you that she's been having an affair, that experience generates an emotion as opposed to being the source of the emotion. However, to me, that's kind of splitting hairs a little bit. I don't really know what the difference is. Let's, for the sake of this discussion, consider emotion a sense like any other. One of the things that movies do most of all is manipulate your emotions. You know, the audio will make your ears strain and the visuals will make your eyes pop. But at the end of the day, it's the emotion that generates that really counts. So we all know that our emotions can be manipulated, and I think we pretty much all accept that. In some contexts, we really hate having it done to us. And in other cases, like watching a movie, That's what we go for. But what about our other senses? Can our other senses be manipulated in a similar way, or even potentially completely hijacked? It sounds like a kind of science fiction theory, but I think things can be a lot more subtle than that. One example, very simple example, is I can manipulate your visual sense just by turning off a light. Now you see something different. It's not a complete hijack or anything like that. It's not significant, but it is one subtle way that I can hijack your senses. And if you really think about it, that's just one of many. One example I thought of was this simple card trick that I came across a few weeks ago from Scam School, where you can actually predict which card someone will choose just by understanding the flaws in the human brain.
This relies on a weird psychological defect that causes things to seem a little more random or unpredictable or unusual than they actually are. This one works about 80% of the time, and it is brilliant. I don't even know how it works, but for some reason, if you pull out exactly these cards in order, the King of Hearts, the Seven of Clubs, the Ace of Diamonds, the Four of Hearts, and the Nine of Diamonds, that alone will cause most people, when they have a free choice, to try to pick the Four of Hearts. Don't know why. But you can sweeten the deal by saying something like, you may think that I actually want you to choose one of these cards. By saying that, they'll immediately cancel out the Ace is too obvious, the King is too obvious because it's the only face card, the Seven is too obvious because it's the only black card, and for some reason, everyone just hates the Nine of Diamonds. But by process of elimination, 80% of the time, it seems like everybody chooses the Four of Hearts.
So you notice there he calls it a brain defect. It's an interesting way to look at it. I guess the art form of this type of magic is called mentalism or whatever. But you can see there, he does explain a little bit of why the brain might reject, say, the Ace of Diamonds or the King of Hearts, because they're more significant cards in our minds. But it's amazing that it works pretty much all the time. And the funny thing is, if you're talking about trying to make a movie that will affect an entire audience in the same way, well, all you need to do is understand how the human brain works, just like Christopher Nolan does. So if we all respond to stimulus in very similar ways, then is the brain just a human computer? Is it just sensory input, electrical activity, and then output in the form of movement, sound, whatever kinetic energy that we release? People don't like to think of ourselves that way, of course, because we all want to be very unique and individual, and we want to express ourselves in that way. Generally speaking, we perceive ourselves to be an observer of our own reality, because in a sense our brain is receiving signals from the world around it by proxy through our emotions and through our five senses. And in a way, I guess we all respond similarly to movies because we all have the same sensory inputs. But movies pretty much hijack your senses, I guess, for good, for the most part, to give you entertainment and enjoyment and pleasure. However, I guess it's worth thinking about if it's possible to hijack people's senses against their will for bad purposes. And again, it's going to sound a little bit strange at first, but there are examples of this. One of the most obvious is how the news media manipulates our emotions to avoid us interpreting facts correctly. I think that's a nice way to put it. They just lie, basically. They lie outright. And there's others. Let's just dip our toe into the realm of conspiracy theory a little bit here and get into a few of the others, because to be honest, I was quite interested in some of this stuff for a long time. One thing is the idea of subliminal messaging, the idea that you could flash images or words on the screen and somehow the subconscious brain would pick it up and it would form part of your belief system. And I think, in terms of, certain types of subliminal messaging, mildly effective, flashing the golden arches while you're watching a football game. Maybe that makes you think of McDonald's. But again, if you look into the research, subliminal messaging is a little hit and miss, and really there's no evidence, no good evidence anyway, no good science to show that subliminal messaging has any real significant effect on viewers. I think possibly governments, media, the powers that be would like it to, and I think they may have experimented with it, but at the end of the day, I think they found way more effective ways to manipulate us, like owning the media. Seems to work pretty well for most people. Another conspiracy theory, but again, one that you can't quite dismiss offhand, is this idea of Illuminati hand gestures and symbols in music videos. You don't have to go far on the internet to find a whole bunch of examples of this kind of thing. Making the triangle with your hands is supposed to symbolize the Eye of Horus, or the Eye of Providence, whatever you want to call it. Of course, there's the satanic, I don't really know, I better not do it, I might invoke Satan by mistake, which would really suck. But yeah, you know the things, the covering the eye, the Baphomet horns, the as above so below, I don't know which way to do it, all of that crap. Now that stuff, if you watch closely enough, and you don't need to watch all that closely to see it, it is in the music videos. You do see the symbolism. It's really there. And there's plenty of examples of symbolism that couldn't be there if it wasn't deliberate. For example, there's one Baphomet face that appears in Rihanna's music video for Umbrella, where it's a computer-generated effect, where they have the liquid effect, and she splashes some liquid at the screen and it comes up, and to me it's pretty clear. There it is. There's Baphomet, whatever the hell that is. It's right there in front of you. The question is, what does it mean? I mean, wouldn't this just come under the umbrella of subliminal messaging, in which case it's been proven to be pretty ineffective? So yeah, I think at the end of the day, you could probably watch music videos without too much fear that it's somehow manipulating your brain. Surely if it was, you'd be the first to know about it, because you'd actually start loving Satan. And if you don't, and you've seen the music videos, doesn't that just mean it didn't work? Another one was backmasking. I don't know if you guys are aware of this backmasking concept, where you play a song or some kind of recording in reverse, and it says something else. There was some interesting examples of this a few years ago with Obama saying the Yes We Can slogan.
Yes we can. Yes we can. Yes we can. Yes we can. Yes we can.
Okay, now so this is iMovie, what I'm using here, and I have the ability to do what's called a reverse. See, all I have to do is click that little button and it reversed the clip around. Now let's see what the clip says now. There's no denying that. All I did was reverse this clip, and it went. Now it goes back to the Yes We Can.
Yes we can. Yes we can.
So he's going to great pains there to make sure that you understand he did not manipulate the audio. I actually never considered that the audio was manipulated, because you can just reverse it yourself if you want to prove it. However, you can hear there kind of that he's saying, thank you, Satan. Thank you, Satan, over and over again. And not only that, he's getting the crowd to chant after him, thank you, Satan. So what does it mean? I mean, if backmasking is real, how did this occur? Well, what would have had to occur for Obama to achieve this clip? First of all, this is probably a live news coverage, so, or at least recorded live, recorded without audio manipulation and so on. So he would actually have to work out a phrase that, when reversed, sounds like "Thank you, Satan." And as you could probably imagine, just reversing the letters isn't going to be enough to do that. He would need to say "Thank you, Satan," then listen to it and say, "Okay, that sounds a little bit like Yes We Can. Oh, luckily enough, that sounds like a campaign slogan. Let's make it ours." So these conspiracies, they're kind of a little bit illogical, and as fascinating as they are, it doesn't really take a lot of research to work out what's at play here. Your brain is being manipulated into thinking that you hear a particular thing. So for instance, in this one, and it's too late now to test it, but you can test it with other things. If you had never been told that Obama, in reverse, was saying, "Thank you, Satan," would you have heard that, or would you have heard gibberish? Well, luckily science has an answer. The fact is, if you look at words while listening to audio, even when that audio is basically just generated white noise, you will start to hear those words in the audio. Your brain does what's called the McGurk effect and basically synchronizes what you're seeing with what you're hearing, even to the extent of manipulating what you hear and what you see to make them match up.
Ba 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 ba.
It would have been much more fun if he'd said buck, don't you think? I mean, if you're going to do an experiment, it would have worked with either word. Why not put a swear in there? Make it a little bit funny. I don't know. I would. That's what I would do. So what have we learned here? You know, what can we take away from all of this? Well, one answer is not a lot. And, you know, you're perfectly welcome to that opinion. The other one is perhaps if you're going to try to manipulate someone's emotions, you should hire Christopher Nolan because he's really fucking good at it. But I guess at the end of the day, it's more about understanding the limitations of our perception and not letting ourselves get tricked into thinking it means something that it doesn't. You know, we can rely to some extent on touch and taste and smell, sight and sound. But at the end of the day, I guess we've just got to find our own truth, because everything that we're getting as inputs from the rest of the world is imperfect. While we might be analytical people, I certainly count myself as one. Perhaps we need to expand our minds a bit to admit that a lot of what we believe really is pure faith. So I've said my piece. Let's hear from you guys. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you think about all the garbage that I just spouted. And yeah, if you can reshare this video, that'd be great. And until then, see you in the next video. Cheers.